My name's Wes Harmon. I build things out of wood. Arbors, stages, fences, whatever needs steady hands and enough patience not to rush a cut. I moved to Cedar Falls a few years back and set up a small shop off the county road. Kept to myself, mostly. Then Hannah Bennett hired me to fix up the ceremony arbor on her family's orchard. And that quiet life of mine got a lot less quiet. It was a Tuesday, I remember that much, because Tuesdays were delivery days and I'd been waiting on a load of cedar that hadn't shown up yet. I was kneeling by the arbor frame, tightening a bolt that honestly didn't need tightening, just giving my hands something to do while I waited. A few feet off, Hannah stood in the middle of the clearing with a clipboard against her hip, reciting some stranger's entire wedding order from memory. Processional. Vows. The exact minute the string quartet was supposed to shift key. She never once looked down at the page. "You'd make a great bride someday," I said, not even looking up from the bolt. "You've got the whole thing memorized better than the actual bride does." She glanced up. Not a big reaction, just a faint smile, the kind that catches you a little off guard because it's warmer than you expected from someone who runs a business like a drill sergeant. "Only if you're the groom," she said, and went right back to her clipboard like she hadn't said anything at all. My wrench went still in my hand for a second. I don't know why. It was a joke. People make jokes like that all the time and nobody thinks twice. But something about the way she said it, flat, almost to herself, stuck with me longer than it should have. Hannah wasn't my boss, not really. She was my neighbor, had been since I moved my shop down the road from her family's orchard. Her father built the place up from rows of cherry trees into a full wedding venue, and when he passed, she took it over and ran it the same way he had. Early mornings, late nights, a phone that buzzed even on Sundays, which she always answered, even if she just sighed first. I'd been hired a few months earlier to rebuild the arbor and the stage behind it. There were other carpenters on her assistants list. I'd heard that from one of the guys on the crew, but she picked me. I never asked why. I just showed up early, worked until the light went, and drove home without much to say to anybody. That was the whole arrangement as far as I understood it. Later that same afternoon, I noticed a woman catch Hannah by the front gate. Reading glasses pushed up into gray hair, a folder tucked under one arm. Her name was Faye. She'd been the orchard's accountant longer than I'd been alive, probably. I only caught part of what she said, something about a meeting in a few weeks. 12 months since Hannah's father passed. Some kind of window in the will that was going to close. I didn't think much of it right then. Wasn't my business. But I noticed Hannah's shoulders drop, just slightly, after Faye walked off toward the office, gravel crunching under her heels the whole way, like she was carrying something heavier than a clipboard. The next morning I found her already out by the arbor before the rest of the crew had even pulled in. She caught me watching her before I could look away. "Long week?" she asked. "Long year," I said. She didn't ask what I meant. I didn't explain. That was sort of how things worked between us those first few months. We both had things we weren't ready to hand over yet, and somehow we both understood that without saying it outright. That same day, a man in a gray suit crossed the gravel lot like the dust itself owed him something. Grant Ashcroft. Hannah's cousin, I'd find out later, though from the way he talked to her it could have fooled you into thinking he ran the place. He had a tablet already lit up with a spreadsheet before he'd even finished walking over. "Maintenance costs on the Ridgeline section are up 11% from last season," he said. Not a hello. Not even close. "I'll bring the full numbers to the meeting," Hannah said. "Bring them," Grant said. "Just want everyone informed before anybody votes on anything." He walked off without waiting for a response. I watched Hannah's jaw tighten, just barely, before she turned back to her clipboard and kept working like nothing had happened. I didn't know yet that this guy was going to turn into a much bigger problem than a spreadsheet number. I kept telling myself none of it was mine to worry about. I was the carpenter. I fixed joints, I tightened bolts, I went home. That's what I told myself anyway, and for a while I almost believed it. But there was something about the way Hannah carried that clipboard, like she never let herself sit still for more than 5 minutes, that made me start paying closer attention than I probably should have. I didn't know it yet, but a woman who could recite a total stranger's wedding by heart was about to become the reason Cedar Falls started feeling less like somewhere I was just passing through. And I really didn't know that her joke about being a bride, and that quiet answer about needing a groom, would turn out to be the truest thing either of us said all season. Not yet. That Tuesday, it was just a bolt that didn't need tightening, and a woman who wouldn't look up from her clipboard even when she smiled. A few weeks passed before anything changed. I kept working on the stage, mostly alone, mostly quiet, and Hannah kept splitting her time between the office and the grounds like she was trying to be in two places at once. Then, on a Tuesday morning, I only remember because I'd started marking Tuesdays as the day things seemed to happen around that orchard. A woman named Renata showed up with a camera she barely used. Hannah had hired her back in spring, some kind of marketing project to get the place photographed before wedding season hit full swing. Renata walked the grounds slower than I expected, touching things more than shooting them, running her fingers along the wood grain, studying the angle of a joint like it was a page in a book only she could read. Then she stopped cold at the ceremony stage, right at the seam where two beams met without a single visible nail or bracket holding them. "Who built this?" she asked. "I did," I said, coming around with a level still in my hand. She looked at me differently after that. I could see it, something shifting behind her eyes, like she was suddenly looking at a completely different person than the one standing there a second ago. "This is an old technique," she said slowly. "I've seen it before. You worked some pretty big jobs a long time back, didn't you?" My stomach dropped a little. Hannah was a few feet away, going over a seating chart, and I saw her look up. Not fast, just slow, the way people do when they're putting something together in their head piece by piece. "That was a while back," I told Renata, hoping that'd be the end of it. It wasn't. She named a technique, a wedding, some magazine feature from years ago. Said people in that world figured I'd just vanished. Retired rich, maybe, or just stopped checking my email. "Something like that," I said, in the kind of tone that's supposed to close a door. Renata seemed to catch on that she'd wandered someplace she wasn't invited, and she excused herself to finish walking the grounds. Hannah didn't say anything right away. She just stood there a second, and I could tell she was doing math in her head. The quiet local guy she'd hired to fix an arbor had once built stages for some of the most talked about weddings on the coast, and never mentioned a word of it in months of working 3 feet from her. "You could have said something," she said, once Renata was out of earshot. I picked the level back up, checked a beam that didn't need checking. "Wasn't relevant to the arbor." "That's not why you didn't say it." She was right. I stood there long enough that I think she figured I wasn't going to answer at all. Then I did. "I left that work 6 years ago. Same time I lost someone. The travel worked fine when there were 2 of us. It didn't work so good alone. I'm not hiding a career, Hannah. I'm just not living in it anymore." She looked at me. Actually looked longer than she usually let herself, and I could tell something in her face recognized something in mine. She knew what it meant to shut a door on an old version of your life. I didn't know how yet, but I could see it. Meanwhile, a couple towns over, Grant was making a phone call neither of us knew anything about. Dialed a number saved under a name that wasn't real. Told whoever picked up that everything was on schedule. 12 months, right on time. Vote was coming soon. He wanted a commission confirmed in writing before he opened his mouth to anybody else. I only found out about that call much later. At the time, all I knew was that 2 days after Renata's visit, the family board sat down for what Hannah called a preliminary meeting. Not the real vote yet, just a warm-up. Grant stood at the head of the table with a chart already glowing behind him. Rising costs. A red line crossing over a blue one. The kind of picture built to scare people before they had time to ask a follow-up question. "I'm not saying we sell everything," Grant said, using that calm voice people use when they want to sound like the only reasonable adult in the room. "I'm saying the Ridgeline parcel isn't earning its keep. Harborview Resorts made an offer, well above what it's worth on paper." Hannah sat across from him, hands folded, letting him finish. We ate sandwiches I'd packed earlier and never gotten around to finishing. Sitting on overturned crates under one bare bulb, the smell of sawdust and cut pine hanging over everything. Somewhere in the middle of that, without either of us steering it there on purpose, I mentioned a notebook of sketches somebody close to me had left behind, still boxed up at my house. I didn't explain much more than that. She didn't ask for more. Then Hannah said something that seemed to surprise even her. I was engaged once. Right here, actually. 6 years ago. Around the same time as whatever happened to you, I think. I looked up. It didn't happen, she said. The wedding. He wasn't who I thought he was, and I found that out 3 weeks before the ceremony. Standing by the pond behind the ridgeline row. Spent the next 2 years telling myself I ran this place because I loved cherry trees. Really, it was just easier than looking at that spot too closely. Which spot? I asked. She tilted her head toward the dark window, toward the shape of the orchard somewhere out past it. You'll walk past it eventually, she said. Won't even know it's the one. You regret it? I asked. Walking away from all that. The name, the write-ups, whatever it would have turned into by now. She thought about that longer than I expected. Some days, she admitted. Not the leaving. Just some days I miss being good at something in front of people who noticed. Out here, nobody knows what I used to be able to do. They just see a guy with a truck full of lumber. I noticed, Hannah said, quiet, before Renata ever opened her mouth. Noticed what? That you never build anything the easy way. If there's a better way that takes twice as long, you'll take it. She turned her cup slowly in her hands. Figured that came from somewhere. Something in me eased a little when she said that. Hard to explain. It's a specific kind of relief, getting noticed for something you'd stopped expecting anybody to notice. Neither of us said much else about the pond, or the notebook, or the 6 years we'd each spent quietly rebuilding something out of an old wreck. I reached over and steadied her folding chair before she'd even fully started to stand. Old habit. Comes from building things that need to hold weight. She sat back down without comment, and neither of us tried to explain what that small thing actually meant. Outside the shed, the wind moved through the cherry trees, same as it probably had for decades before that night. Not caring one bit about boardrooms or deadlines or old broken engagements. For a little while, neither did we. I didn't think much about it walking home that night. Should've, probably. Because word travels fast in a town this size, and by the end of that same week, somebody had already carried the story of that dinner straight to Grant Ashcroft's door, and he wasn't the type to let something like that sit unused. I heard about it before Hannah even had the chance to tell me herself, which tells you something about how fast this town moves. Grant used the story of the dinner carefully, and in front of an audience that couldn't easily push back on him. At the next board meeting, same week, not some later date, I want to be clear about that. He brought it up while talking to the whole table instead of looking at Hannah because, in his words, perception matters. I only bring it up, he said, because we're a few weeks from a vote that decides this company's future, and our director's spending her evenings alone with the contractor she personally hired. I'm not questioning her judgment outright. I'm asking the board to consider whether her judgment's the only thing steering this room right now. Silence followed. Not confusion, agreement dressed up as caution. One of the older board members, a longtime friend of Hannah's father, cleared his throat and said it was a fair question. Not an accusation, just wondering how anyone could know it wasn't clouding things. Hannah kept her hands flat on the table until she trusted her voice not to shake. I've run this company alone for a year, she said. The numbers back every decision I've made in that time. You want to question my judgment, question the numbers. Don't question who I eat dinner with. The meeting ended without resolution, which was its own kind of damage. Nothing decided. Everybody unsettled, quietly doing math on the walk out. I showed up at her office that evening, still in my work clothes, sawdust on my forearms, jaw set tighter than she'd probably seen from me before. You want me off the job? I asked. No warm-up. Say the word. I'll finish the stage and disappear. Makes it easier on you. No, she said. Fast, sharper than she meant, then quieter. No, I don't want that. That's not the same as wanting me here, I said. I want you here. And for the first time I could tell she meant it as more than a line about carpentry schedules. Whatever this is, I'm not letting Grant decide it for me. I didn't say anything clever back. Just nodded once, same way I nod when a joint finally sits square after a few tries. Meanwhile, and I only pieced this part together afterward from Faye herself, she hadn't stopped thinking about a strange number she'd found in the books a couple weeks back. That weekend, alone in the office with a space heater humming, She pulled 2 years of vendor records and laid them across the conference table Grant liked to stand at during his presentations. An outside consulting fee kept showing up. Same amount, every time, routed through a company she didn't recognize, Ridgeline Advisory. She traced its registered agent to a P.O. box a couple towns over, and after an hour of digging through public filings she probably wasn't technically supposed to be looking at on a Saturday, she found the name behind it. Grant Ashcroft. She checked the date twice, sure she'd misread it. 14 months back. 3 months before Hannah's father's diagnosis. 5 before he died. Whatever Grant had planned, he'd started planning it while her father was still alive and trusting him completely. Faye had worked for that family long enough to have genuinely cared about Hannah's father. She sat with it a long time before she picked up the phone. The call came early Monday morning, before the first truck had even pulled into the lot. Faye showed up at Hannah's office holding a folder against her chest like it might come apart if she loosened her grip. "I need you to see this before anything else happens this week," she said. She laid it out piece by piece. The shell company, the registered agent, payments tracing not to any real consulting work, but to a private agreement between Grant and Harborview Resorts, signed over a year earlier, guaranteeing him a payout if the Ridgeline sale ever closed after Hannah's authority ran out. He hadn't been protecting the company's finances at all. He'd been setting himself up to profit off selling it out from under her the whole time. I found Hannah 20 minutes later, still at her desk, the folder open in front of her. I didn't ask what was wrong before I pulled a chair around and sat next to her instead of across. Didn't offer advice. Didn't tell her it'd be fine. Just stayed close enough she could lean sideways if she needed to. After a second, she did. Just slightly, shoulder against mine. Neither of us made it into more than it needed to be. "I've been doing this alone for a year," she said, more to the folder than to me. "Didn't know how much until right now." "You're not doing it alone today," I told her, and left my hand resting on the back of her chair. Close enough to matter. Not close enough to push for anything more than that. 3 days ahead of the deadline written into her father's will, the board sat down for the real vote, the one everything else had just been leading up to. Hannah stood at the head of the table where Grant usually stood, a stack of documents in front of her instead of a slideshow. She didn't raise her voice once through the whole thing. Didn't need to. The numbers did that part for her. The shell company, the registered agent, the commission agreement, dated months before her father's death. All laid out in an order that made the whole thing impossible to misread, no matter how badly anybody in that room wanted to spin it. Grant tried anyway. "This is exactly what I warned you about," he said, gesturing toward the back where I sat at Hannah's request. "She's built her entire defense around a man she's personally involved with. Ask yourselves whose judgment's actually compromised here." "Ask yourselves," Hannah said, calm, "why a consulting fee to a company he secretly owned started showing up in our books a full year before my father died." The room went still. She turned to me and I stood without being asked twice, walked up front the same unhurried way I walk onto any job site. I didn't talk about feelings or family loyalty. I talked numbers, return on renovated ceremony space, the premium couples pay for a working orchard over some generic banquet hall, figures I actually knew from years spent building for exactly this kind of venue. I took apart Grant's maintenance argument the way you take apart a joint that was cut wrong from the start. No malice in it. Just methodical until there was nothing left for him to hide behind. "This is a family company," the older board member said quietly, looking straight at Grant for the first time all meeting. "Your uncle built half of what's under this roof. I'd like to know how you sat across from him and let him sign anything without telling him what you'd already agreed to behind his back." Grant didn't have an answer for that. He tried something about protecting shareholder value, but it came out thin, and nobody at that table was still listening close enough to catch it. The vote came back 8-1. Grant was suspended pending a formal review, walked out by the same board member who'd questioned Hannah 2 weeks earlier, the one who wouldn't quite meet Grant's eyes on the way to the door. I found Hannah alone in the emptied room afterward, still holding the folder Faye had brought her. Neither of us reached for anything to say right away. She just exhaled, long and complete, like she'd been holding one breath for an entire year. I crossed the room and put a hand on her shoulder, and for the moment that was enough for both of us. The days after moved differently than the ones before. Slower, less braced for the next blow. The orchard had no idea a family had almost sold off a piece of itself out from under her. The trees kept turning color at their own pace, and I noticed Hannah walking the rows more than the ledgers strictly required. No clipboard, no real reason beyond wanting to be there. I found her at the shed one evening. No meeting to prep for, nothing on the calendar. "I don't have a business reason to be here," she said from the doorway. "Noticed," I said, setting the sander down. "Wanted to say thank you. For all of it. You already thanked me in the parking lot. Wanted to say it again without a folder between us this time." We stood there a second, close enough that the space between us had stopped being about work. I didn't reach for her. She didn't reach for me. But neither of us stepped back either. Under that bare bulb, with the smell of cut pine still hanging around, that quiet felt like its own answer. A week after the vote, news arrived the way it always seems to write when you think things have finally settled. Renata called with something that landed somewhere between flattering and unsettling. A trade magazine wanted to run a piece about my quiet return to a craft I'd walked away from years back. Along with it came something else, an offer forwarded through Renata from a well-known events company. Wanted me back in some form. Freelance, high profile, no need to move anywhere if I didn't want to. Just my name attached to their biggest jobs again, the way it used to be. I read it twice at my kitchen table that night, long after the house had gone quiet, and I didn't answer right away. Carried it around for the better part of a week, turning it over the same way I'd turn a piece of lumber before deciding what to do with it. On paper, it was everything my old work had been building toward: recognition, better money, work that would outlive me in photographs at other people's weddings for years. But it was also, no question, a door back to a version of my life that ended the day I lost someone I loved. And I wasn't sure yet if walking through it again meant moving forward, or just moving backward with nicer lighting on the whole thing. Hannah heard about the offer from Renata before I told her myself. Of course she did, this town. And when I finally brought it up, sitting across from her on the same crates in the shed, she didn't ask me to stay. "I won't pretend I don't want you here," she said. "But I'm not going to be the reason you turn down something you're proud of. That's not why I'd take it," I told her. "And it's not why I wouldn't either." In the end, it wasn't some big dramatic moment that settled it. Just a quiet evening sitting with myself, thinking about the smaller, steadier life I'd built in this town without really meaning to, and realizing I didn't want to trade it for a bigger name and a busier calendar. 2 days later, I called the events company back, turned down the standing offer, agreed instead to take on a handful of freelance projects on my own terms, out of my own shop, without ever leaving Cedar Falls for good. Didn't make an announcement about it. Just kept showing up at the orchard every morning, same as I had for months, and let that be the whole answer. Harvest ended the way it always did. Last of the cherries stripped from the trees. The whole crew gathering for a small celebration Hannah's father had started decades back. One she'd never once considered skipping. Faye was there, finally letting herself relax after weeks of feeling responsible for everything the whole mess had uncovered. Off at the edge of the clearing, away from the tables and the string lights, I'd quietly built something small. An arbor, barely big enough for 2 people, not tied to any client's order, not on any invoice Faye would ever see. Hannah found it before anybody told her it was there, drawn by instinct more than direction, and she understood exactly what it was the second she saw it standing alone in the dark. I was waiting beside it, hands in my pockets, watching her cross the grass toward me. "You'd make a great bride someday," I said. Same words as that first afternoon. Nothing about my voice was the same as it had been back then, though. She stopped in front of me, close enough now that neither of us needed to raise our voices over the music drifting from the tables behind us. "Only if you're the groom," she said, softer this time, like she finally believed it herself. I got down on one knee right there, under the arbor I'd built for nobody but her. Didn't have some long speech ready. Just told her she was the reason I'd stopped feeling like a stranger in this town, the reason I'd finally stopped keeping the door shut on my own life, and that I wanted to keep building every day after this one right next to her. "Marry me," I said. She didn't hesitate, not even a second. "Yes," I slid the ring onto her hand while the string lights swayed over the folding tables and the trees stood the way they'd stood for 60 autumns. Patient, not caring one bit about any of this, having watched the whole town grow up around them one season at a time. I took her hand in mine. First time either of us let it be that simple. Neither of us needed to say anything else. She hadn't been looking for a groom when this all started. She'd been looking for someone who wouldn't walk away the moment things got hard. And under the arbor I built for her, she finally stopped looking.